Welcome back to Memory Card. Last week, you heard us talking about Metroid Prime 4. We are a Level 30 Games podcast that takes a look at the newest titles while drawing a line back on the classics. Again, I'm your host, Metroid Drew. With me, I got Tom Prime. And today, we're going to talk about, in Slot 2, the games that really hit home when we were playing Metroid Prime 4. And for Tom, I think your game is...
My game's Ocarina of Time, if we're being honest. But to keep it, watch Slot 1 if you want to know why. In this case, I guess for me, it would have to be just Metroid Prime.
Yeah, so Metroid Prime obviously added a whole new element to this series. And what's hilarious is we were having a conversation, and I don't even remember. I remember buying Metroid Prime, but I don't know if I bought Metorid Fusion on the same day that it... I'm just still shocked that both these games came out on the same day. Like, that's unheard of today for a franchise to release two games that both were phenomenally reviewed and people love in this series of games, and has literally created the DNA to what we're playing now for the most part.
Yeah, well, Prime especially, right, kind of, we've had now 3 sequels to this series, and Fusion kind of carried over that DNA of, Super Metroid from the SNES, which really the Game Boy Advance was kind of known for saying, all right, well, we're not the biggest powerhouse in the world, but the Game Boy Advance handled 16-bit games incredibly well, and so you had this amazing carryover of games from the Super Nintendo era that all of a sudden were a really great fit for this handheld. And that also allowed them to take a look at franchises like Metroid and say, well, we could port Super Metroid over to the Game Boy Advance, but why don't we kind of use that foundation and sprite work and stuff to make something new? And yeah, a same-day drop of a Game Boy Advance, a high-profile Game Boy Advance game, and then a mainline console game of the same franchise with 2 different stories is kind of wild. But Metroid, that came out, 2002. So I guess the reason I didn't know was because I was, 17 and probably didn't have money to buy both. So of course I was going to pick the console version and jump into that first.
Yeah, so Metroid Prime, right, came out on GameCube 2002. It was, again, 6 years from the main line, which was Super Metroid. I think was 96. I'd have to look up.
94, 95?
94, so even more. It was 8 years. And this was that transition of Nintendo going from this 2D world that Mario did to this 3D world that 64 did. And now we're going from a Super Nintendo to a GameCube. And, you're talking vastly different engines and building a brand new game from the ground up that was not the norm back in the day.
Especially for a franchise that was notorious for exploration and maybe a little bit less about combat. Like, combat was a means to an end in Super Metroid. Like, I have to get to the end of this room on a 2D plane. I need to destroy these enemies because I can't just run around them, right? So to take this franchise and then say, nope, we're going to do it not as a first-person shooter, but as a first-person adventure game, was kind of bold. And I think having kind of skipped over the N64 era, I think that was part of the reason why they said, hey, we can explore this in a different way with, higher fidelity as well as that 3D landscape, because now we've got the power to do something really special with our vision and what we want to do. And obviously, I don't want to say too much that's been said a million times before about when Prime came out and how they transitioned to 3D, but Japan as a market is not known for having a huge player base or having well-sold games that fall into the first-person shooter category. So this, I think, was Nintendo's kind of response to, we don't make first-person shooters, but we can do this game in a first-person. And it is great, but it also didn't really sell well in Japan either. And I don't think 4 Metroid Prime 4 sold very well in Japan now, even
No,
so
it
like
did not.
that market hasn't changed much. But like pretty monumental of a shift. I mean, it was, and the remaster for Switch is like a gorgeously looking game.
Yeah, it's crazy that they married exploration with a first person shooter, and again, I feel like Nintendo and Retro doesn't make games for the Western fan base, but this game felt like something that they knew people were gonna buy in the States and gravitate towards because it sold really well at the time.
Right, and it was done by a Western studio, which was also in 2002
Unheard of.
wildly unheard of that they would give one of their big intellectual properties at the time, which I guess when you look at 2002 and Super Metroid, which came out in 1994, I don't know if that's a long enough span where you would call Metroid a dormant franchise. Samus had some, popularity as a character in Smash Brothers. So like the character itself was relevant, but Nintendo was not known for giving its stuff out to people to kind of play around with. How they lucked into finding Retro Studios is kind of beyond me because I think it was one of the first major games that they made.
Yeah, it definitely was. And most of these Nintendo like spin-offs start in their R&D. I know Kirby and HAL Laboratory was like a test place for them to try out some things, and then Kirby was invented.
Right, yeah. And Nintendo is kind of now at the point where they can, hey, we have an idea which characters are going to fit best, and then they kind of give it to that. And I think Samus as a character, I mean, you're giving fans a lady bounty hunter with a cannon for an arm. I think, like, based on that alone, first person kind of works. But I do like that they still stress, the adventure aspect of things, the puzzle aspect of things. It's not about going through. It's not Doom. You're not going into a new room and blasting a bunch of enemies. You're going into a room, and I think Prime did this so well. You're going into a room to like solve how to continue on to spaces you can't get to or need to go to. So you're not killing enemies because they're in your way. You're killing enemies to like achieve minor objectives, and those enemies just kind of environmentally are trying to defend themselves. And so it really feels like you are a hostile invader on these planets that you're trying to be dealt with while you're just, hey, I'm trying to survive. Like it had this cool feeling of, yes, I can shoot things, but survival was a big part of that. I just like, you don't get a lot of games that kind of marry all that well. They always kind of break into, okay, but at the end of the day, you're shooting stuff. And that was not the case with Metroid Prime.
Yeah, there were many rooms where you had the lore of the Chozos that you were scanning, right? And had to actually puzzle solve to get out of it. I think one of them had a literal half pipe where at some point you had to boost and get to a certain area. Every time those showed up, they weren't frustrating. It was like, how can I use my abilities in this world to advance myself, like you said?
Yeah, it did a really good job of, and I keep liking it back to Zelda, where you would have an arsenal of movesets, right? Whether it's the morph ball or the bomb or, like you said, like finding that space and realizing, oh, this is how I have to do this. Metroid did a really good job of kind of, all right, you've unlocked this ability. You need to use it to leave this immediate area, which kind of gives you an example of how it can be used in other areas that have similar architecture or design or layout or symbols. And so it does kind of cue you in into when you should look for that stuff. But it's always great, I think, when a game says, okay, you need to progress. We're not going to explicitly tell you how. It's not like, all right, climb the yellow markers to get to where you need to go. It's just, you can see the map. You're in a room. There's a door up there. What are the things that I've been taught in this game that I can use to try and get up there? And it puts its limitations in your face. Like, you know, I can climb up these platforms, but I haven't unlocked the double jump yet. So, like, I can't do that, and I know I'm going to have to come back here. So what can I do? And sometimes those dead ends also put you in a position to say, this is not where I'm supposed to be right now. I got to exit and try and find a different way. Like, it does a really good job of kind of roadblocking you with intention, but then rewarding those moments where you go, oh, I have this new thing. Let me go back to that space and see what's there.
Yeah, they did a good job where Metroid Prime 4 didn't, was like, you got the space jump, or the double jump, or the grapple beam, and yeah, there was backtracking, but it wasn't like a slog to get where you needed to. You kind of knew, like, oh, in the back of my head, I remember this room, this grapple beam in this biome that I need to get to the next area. So they did a great job of like leading you on, and I always loved the sequence breaking. And I actually enjoy watching people be like, well, if you get this, you can actually, like, figure out this little sliver of, like, asset that you can walk on or whatever to just sequence break. It's just kind of funny to throughout the entire series that there's always ways to advance yourself even when you don't have those items.
Now, let me ask you, because I've always been curious about this. Metroid Prime was a game that I enjoyed playing, but can remember very little of the actual story setup. Please refresh my memory on if that story was delivered mostly through scanning items and reading stuff, or were there actual moments of this is why you're doing this, other than, hey, I crashed here, you need to get out? Because you had mentioned that you really enjoyed the story of Metorid Fusion. And I'm in that moment, I was like, I don't remember the story of Metroid Prime. I just was like, this is cool, but I got to get out of here.
Yeah, so it's a normal scenario of like Super Metroid where your ship is there. In Super Metroid, you're saving the last known Metroid, right? In this one, I forget, the beginning was actually on a space station that you were scanning stuff, and then you got to the planet. What I want to get to the fusion at some point, but what I remember is a lot of the story wasn't scanning, but there's always like there was a Metroid because at the end, right? And I don't know if they were being born or a new breed was hatching.
I vaguely remember going through like a lot of labs and stuff, so I think there was something there, but
yeah, a lot of the lore is in scanning, right? But for some reason, I just love like Egyptian things, and like the Chozo always reminds me of this like ancient society that gifted this little child, Samus at the time, the capabilities to utilize their technology,
right?
And that's in there somewhere throughout. When there's actually cutscenes that show you, were they cutscenes? Pretty sure that show them gifting you the ability and the knowledge, which happened in Zero Mission. Zero Mission was a remake of the original NES one, and you actually got a ton more plot of what actually transpired in the original Metroid in Zero Mission. And then Fusion added to that because there's this whole backstory of Samus actually has this beloved friend. Now I'm blanking on the name. I don't want to say Malcolm.
Yes. The Adventures of Samus and Malcolm.
It's some admiral that she has this, like, not a fling, just like some remembrance of like some childhood person that is very dear to her that carries on into this like artificial intelligence that takes over the space station. And in Fusion, throughout there, you get a ton more story of like the overarching from Super Metroid to Metroid Fusion, and Metroid Prime has its own series of like where it's the Legend of Zelda timelines where it branches off at some point, right? And each one has their own thing. So like when Metroid Prime 4 came out, I was expecting us to be on the same page as one of the older games. Like Psylocke felt like Fusion's enemy, which was Metroid X or Samus X. It was a copy. It was a whole new species that could copy the DNA of creatures, and then ended up making a duplicate of you. And it was a literal survival horror because you're like creeping through in Morph Ball like vents, and that X creature was like trying to hunt you down. And it was just very atmospheric, just like Metroid Prime is. Like, all the games, for whatever reason, I don't know how they do it. Like, a 16-bit game, like you said, just brought back this, like, adventurous and exploration, and, like, you literally were, like, hesitant to get into some rooms because of how aggressive certain enemies were. Or,
right.
like, in Dread, like, those, what were the bots called?
I don't remember. I can picture them, but I forget what
they're
called.
basically amiibos. But those things were like horrifying. Like,
yeah, because they one shot you.
Yeah,
right?
and that's the way X was in Fusion.
Okay.
But yeah, those stories, I'd have to refresh myself on them. But like, you saved the Metroid and Super Metroid, and then in Fusion there was again another space station with a distress signal that you went out, and there was a new species that was taking over Metroids and you and other things and made a duplicate. And then you got a whole new suit. Like, every time I get a new suit in Metroid, is just like, where was this earlier? Because the Varia suit always is the one that you need to get into the fire zone, and
right.
You're just always ready for the next adventure as soon as you get that suit.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely they do a good job of, well, of course, the trope of taking it all away, but as they give it back to you and you feel more and more powerful with all the stuff you have, you're like, now I'm the bounty hunter. Now if I wanted to go and just kill stuff, I'm equipped to do so in the most, like, stylistic fashion. Like, she is a very acrobatic character. I mean, not when you play, because you don't do all the backflips and cool stuff that you get to see in cutscenes and from, like, Smash Brothers, but, like, she's a pretty badass character, and you feel that way towards the end of that game.
You see it more in Zero Mission. She actually gets stripped of her entire suit and is doing, like, flips and climbing, and you see how athletic she is. When it comes to, this is a weird tangent, but the movement of the game, this was the first time that people were complaining because the GameCube had 2 analog sticks, which was an upgrade from N64.
Well, yeah, it had 1.5 analog
exactly.
sticks.
And that's what people were complaining about, was that the one analog stick, your analog stick, not the C stick, your actual analog stick, actually moved and turned you at the same time. And people were very mad about this.
Yeah, I mean, that's the classic GoldenEye controls, right? Like, strafing.
Yeah,
what's that
strafing.
about?
I mean, sometimes it gets you to where you need to be just slightly faster.
Yeah.
They definitely didn't learn from their mistakes when it came to the N64 to the GameCube in that aspect. It's like, you literally created a second analog stick. Why can I not use that to view myself? I think
it's the Nintendo monkey paw. We want a second analog stick, and Nintendo goes, "You got it," and then they give you this little C nub, and you're like, "Okay, cool, thank you."
C-nub. In the remaster, did they do any quality of life?
They fixed the controls. It's got true, like, dual joystick controls. It feels really good. Yeah.
I would definitely have to. I didn't buy it because I own the original one, and I don't know. I don't want it to, like, tarnish my impression of the original Metroid Prime, because as soon as 4 came out, I knew, like, I could just see a lot of Metroid Prime 1 because it's lasted so long.
As soon as 4 came out and I finished it, I was like, I want to just go back and play Metroid Prime 1. It's kind of like, I don't know. It's like when you're like, oh, there's a new version of this. Cool. It just makes me want the old version back. You know, like...
It's fair. I know when Metroid Dread came out and I beat it, I went back to Super Metroid. And then when I beat Dread again, I went back to Fusion. Like, this is a series that I like to revisit quite often, just because I feel like you know where things are, you know how to do it. The more you play it, the quicker you are, right? I've seen speedrunners, like, shave off seconds and ends up beating Super Metroid in, like, 40 minutes, which is crazy to me. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
When, like, the ultimate goal originally was, like, under an hour and a half to see her take off her suit and be in her
Bikini?
skivvies, yeah, her bikini. Same thing with Metroid Prime. When I revisited it a few times, it's just like things came back to you very quickly. It wasn't as much of a slog that I feel like Metroid Prime 4 is if I go back to, because of that open world, because of the assets and the sequencing that they created.
Yeah, it's a very well meticulately crafted game. Like when you I don't think it's ever a bad thing when you can kind of see the blueprint for like this is what they did because they took the time to make sure they did it well. But like that game like proudly has its level design and area design. I feel like it wears it on its sleeve because it is such a huge strength to Prime. The one thing that I didn't care for about 4, well, the one thing I didn't care about in any of the Prime games is I hate their map. That 3D map sucks. And part of why I didn't mind it as much in Metroid Prime 4 is because Metroid Prime 4 was so spaced out that it was kind of easy to orient myself. Metroid Prime is very layered and kind of crammed together, and so to be able to figure out where I am and where I'm going was always challenging with that map. But like the trade-off is that the design of the game was just so much stronger. And yeah, there was backtracking, but like it always felt rewarding and it was kind of organic to where you were. It wasn't like I gotta take this motorcycle to the other area. It was like, oh, I have to take this elevator to the Arctic area, but like it's so tightly knit that it just feels really organic, like as a living space.
Anything else that we didn't touch on with Metroid Prime or Fusion?
No, I mean, unless you wanted to jump into the Prime sequels, like as a trilogy. I mean, again, the story was kind of lost on me. So Dark World Samus and I don't
Which
remember.
was cool.
I don't remember almost a single thing from Prime 3 other than it had the ugliest box art in the history of Nintendo games.
We can here's what we'll do. Prime 1, Ocarina of Time. Prime 2, Majora's Mask. Prime 3 is Skyward Sword. Literally, like, half of the game you're spent in this, like, air temple, like, in the middle of nowhere, and there was no assets on the ground. It was just, like, you in space. Like, that's the one zone that I remember the most from, and it would... Yeah, I think it definitely is plummeted. And you can even see that in, like, Metacritic scores and IGN's ratings is, like, Metroid Prime was like a 9 or a 10, and then Prime 2 was still a 9, and then 3 was like an 8, and then 4 is God knows what.
Which then by your scale, Metroid Other M is Link 2. So it's the game that no one wanted.
Which is sad because I do like Link 2, and I've beaten multiple times.
Have you really?
And I've beaten Other M multiple times. There was something about M, which we could get into another day.
No, we don't need to. It's cool.
I think it was because everyone hated it that I wanted to enjoy it.
Probably. You know what? I want every person that posted about how much they hated Miles McKenzie saying anything to go play Other M and realize that everyone talks for like the entire game.
Oh, I thought it was only the beginning.
That was a Team Ninja game, right?
Yeah, that was also why I liked it.
That's a weird mashup right there.
I'm in. Please do that more. Like, people don't take enough risks anymore.
All right, fine. Let's start the petition for the Metroid Other M HD remake for Switch 2.
Ninja Gaiden 5 will become Metroid Gaiden 5.
Pass.
Okay. Well, on that note, I think we shot through enough enemies in Metroid Prime 1 and Metroid Fusion. We'll see you next month. Thank you, Tom, for joining me for both slots.
Got it. My pleasure.
We'll see you next month.
Bye.
Bye.